The sun spilled gold over the Kenyan savannah, stretching shadows across tall grass as the jeeps lined up for the morning safari. Emily Carter, 23 years old, leaned against the side of her vehicle, raising her phone for one last picture before they set off. She tilted her head just enough to catch the herd of elephants grazing in the distance. Her smile was radiant, untouched by the weight that had followed her across continents. Later, millions would stare at that image online, replaying the innocence of it, wondering how joy could vanish so quickly. Emily had come here chasing air, space to breathe after 2 relentless years of medical school in London. Her classmates admired her determination. Professors praised her precision, but exhaustion had carved hollow circles beneath her eyes. She had told herself this trip would reset her soul. The wide skies, the untamed wilderness, the chance to be small in a world that wasn't measured by exams or deadlines. Still, her mother's voice lingered in her ears as she replayed their last phone call, pressed into the corner of her lodge the night before. "Promise me you'll be careful, Em," her mother said, her tone balancing between concern and pleading. Emily laughed softly. "Mom, it's a safari, not a war zone. I'll be fine. I'll send you pictures every day, I swear. Pictures don't prove you're safe. Just keep your wits about you. You trust people too quickly." The words stung, though they were true. Emily had always been quick to believe the best in strangers. She masked her unease with a smile. "I'll be careful," she repeated, then whispered, "I love you." Her mother's sigh echoed down the line, the kind of sigh that carried years of worry. The phone call ended, but the weight of it remained. Emily tucked her phone into her bag, unaware that in less than a day, that same device would be pried from the dirt. Screen cracked, its silence more haunting than words. The morning air was sharp, carrying the scent of dust and acacia trees. Tourists gathered near the jeeps, adjusting cameras and murmuring in anticipation. Emily studied them discreetly. A couple speaking in hushed, irritated tones. A man in an expensive watch who stood apart. 2 young Americans snapping selfies. Then there was a guide, tall and quiet, his eyes fixed on the horizon as though it whispered things only he could hear. Emily adjusted the strap of her backpack and took a deep breath. She felt lighter here, freer, though a sliver of unease curled at the back of her mind. She shook it off and stepped forward. The camera on her phone clicked once more, capturing her bright smile, the elephants behind her, the untamed sky above. Later, investigators would freeze on that image, magnify its corners, searching for answers. But for now, it was just a photograph, an ordinary, fleeting joy. She slipped the phone back into her pocket and climbed into the open jeep. The leather seat was warm from the sun, the air alive with the distant cry of birds. She brushed a strand of hair from her face and glanced once at the others, offering a polite smile. The guide started the engine. The vehicle rumbled forward, leaving behind the safety of the lodge. Emily turned her face to the wind, unaware that this ride marked the final stretch of her story. Somewhere beyond the horizon, secrets waited in the grass, and by the time the jeep returned, one seat would be empty. When the jeeps rolled back into the lodge courtyard at dusk, no one seemed to notice at first that one passenger was missing. The group dispersed in silence, weary from the day's heat and long drives. Cameras clicked off, dust-covered clothes were shaken out, and drinks were ordered at the open-air bar. It wasn't until much later, when the lamps along the paths flickered on, that her absence carved itself into reality. Emily Carter had not returned to her room. The lodge manager knocked twice on her door, then again with force. Inside, the bed was neatly made, her luggage untouched. A single guidebook lay open on the nightstand beside a bottle of half-finished water. Nothing suggested she had been there since morning. By sunrise, whispers circulated among the tourists. Guides compared notes, trying to recall when they had last seen her. One swore she had climbed down near the river bend to take photos of the water birds. Another insisted she had remained in the jeep until their final stop. None of them could agree. She walked off for just a minute. One guide muttered, his voice tight, "I thought she was behind us." "No," another corrected sharply. "She never left my sight until the last stop. Someone else must have seen her after that." Their words tangled like the thorn bushes at the riverbank. Contradictory, confusing, impossible to align. By mid-morning, the local police arrived, their presence altering the lodge's atmosphere. What had been a sanctuary of leisure became a place of scrutiny. Armed officers swept the grounds, their boots pressing into red dust. Dogs were released, noses low to the earth, tracing scents through grass and shadow. Narration settled into silence as they searched. The savannah seemed suddenly endless, an ocean of grass that could swallow anything. Rangers moved in widening circles, eyes scanning for signs that the land had chosen to keep her. Then came the fragments. A single shoe print pressed into damp soil, smaller than the men's, lighter than the guide's. Nearby, a pale scarf dangled from a thorn bush, strands of fabric caught like desperate fingers reaching back. Officers collected both, bagging them with clinical precision. But the discoveries raised more questions than answers. The tourists gathered in uneasy clusters near the lodge, watching the search unfold. Some wrung their hands. Others spoke in hushed tones, their faces pinched with guilt or fear. The weight of suspicion settled over them all. "This isn't just an accident," whispered a young woman from the group, her eyes darting nervously. "You don't know that." Another snapped too quickly. The tension fractured what had once been casual bonds. They were no longer companions on an adventure, but potential witnesses, or suspects. Meanwhile, officers took statements one by one. Each account seemed to warp slightly, bending under pressure of memory. Who last saw her? Who sat closest in the jeep? Who noticed her stepping away? Every answer deep in the fog. By afternoon, international calls were made. Emily Carter, medical student from London, was officially declared missing. Her name traveled faster than the dust storms, into embassies, onto news feeds, across social media. The photograph she had posted the morning before was already being reshared, her smile transforming into a haunting emblem of what was now feared lost. The savannah, vast and beautiful, refused to surrender its secret. But within the group itself, glances grew sharper, voices more strained. Trust eroded. Somewhere among them, someone knew more than they were saying. And as the sun dropped low again, casting the world in crimson light, the police realized the trail they followed might not just lead into the wild. It might lead straight into human deceit. The lodge dining hall was transformed into an interrogation chamber. Tables once set for candlelit dinners were now cluttered with notebooks, half-drunk mugs of coffee, and the sharp presence of uniformed officers. One by one, the tourists were summoned, their stories recorded beneath the hum of ceiling fans. What had begun as an adventure now felt like confinement. The first to speak were the honeymooners, Claire and James Thornton. They were young, newly bound in marriage, but their words clashed like flint and steel. Claire's fingers trembled as she recounted the safari stops, glancing at her husband before finishing sentences he refused to complete. She seemed happy," Claire murmured. "Emily was friendly, asked me about our wedding, even offered to take our picture." James cut her off, his jaw tight. "She wandered too much, always looking for something or someone. If she went missing, it's because she couldn't follow the rules." The officers exchanged a look. Beneath the surface of love, cracks of resentment had already begun to show. Next came Richard Hale, the wealthy businessman who had insisted on traveling alone. His tailored shirt stood out awkwardly against the dust-stained walls. He sat with hands folded, voice calm but calculated. "I hardly spoke to the girl," Richard said, too busy with her own world. Always on her phone, scribbling in some journal. "I don't see how her disappearance has anything to do with me." Yet his eyes darted toward the door as he spoke, as though searching for escape. The two American students followed, Maya and Brooke, energetic, sharp-tongued, and uncomfortably flippant under questioning. Their friendship played out like a performance. Inside jokes, sudden giggles, unfinished sentences that seemed designed to distract. "Emily was sweet, but intense," Maya said, twirling a strand of hair around her finger. "She kept pulling the guide aside, asking about the land, about his life. It was kind of weird." Brooke leaned forward, eyes glittering. Maybe she was into him. "You saw it, right? The way she looked at him." The room stiffened at the suggestion. Finally, Daniel, the safari guide, took a seat. His presence was quiet, steady, but not unshakable. He answered questions with care, his deep voice deliberate. She asked about the river. Daniel admitted. She said it felt alive, like it was watching her. I told her to stay close, that it wasn't safe to wander. That was the last I saw her. The officers pressed harder, but Daniel's face revealed nothing. He was a man used to silence, used to holding truths the land itself refused to give away. As statements piled up, inconsistencies multiplied. Timelines blurred. Who had seen Emily last? Who was standing nearest when the Jeep pulled away? The puzzle refused to form a clear picture. Outside the walls of the lodge, another storm gathered. News of Emily's disappearance spread rapidly. Her final Instagram post reshared thousands of times. Headlines screamed, "British student missing on safari." Photographs of her, smiling, young, hopeful, flashed across feeds and screens. Strangers who had never heard her name now spoke of her, as though they had known her all their lives. In London, reporters crowded outside her university. Old friends gave interviews, piecing together her life from fragments of memory. She was brilliant, one classmate said. Driven but lonely, she wanted more than just medicine. She wanted connection. The media turned her into a symbol, but inside the lodge, her absence was painfully real. The tourists avoided one another's eyes, their meals eaten in silence. Guilt hung over them like smoke, invisible yet suffocating. Late that night, Claire was heard whispering angrily to James in their room. Maya and Brooke argued by the pool until officers broke them apart. And Richard Hale slipped outside alone, cigarette glowing in the dark, muttering words no one else could hear. Emily's name was everywhere now, but the truth of her final moments was nowhere to be found. The police realized the savannah might not hold the only secrets. The answers could be sitting across from them, hidden in plain sight, waiting for cracks to widen. The lodge awoke to the whir of machines and the growl of engines, where silence had once reigned. Drones now circled overhead, their cameras scanning the endless plains. Rangers spread outward in a slow-moving wave, their khaki uniforms blending with the dust. Dogs barked furiously, noses pressed to the ground, tugging their handlers toward scents that disappeared as quickly as they were found. The search for Emily Carter had grown larger, louder, more desperate. From above, the savannah stretched like an ocean of green and gold, breathtaking in its vastness. Herds of zebra moved like shifting tides, while giraffes lifted their necks curiously at the strange intrusion. But to police and rangers, this beauty masked something darker, a silence that concealed instead of comforted. Somewhere in this wilderness, Emily's trail had broken. Narration seeped into the emptiness. She could have walked only a short distance from the Jeep, yet the land could make that distance infinite. The grass swallowed footprints. The river erased all traces. The wild was merciless in its indifference. The dogs caught something here. A ranger called, holding up a hand. Officers gathered near a patch of dirt by the river's edge. A shallow impression was visible, as if someone had knelt or stumbled. Next to it lay a shattered phone. Its screen cracked into a spiderweb of glass. For a moment, no one moved. Then the lead officer lifted it carefully with gloved hands. "It's hers," he confirmed. The air thickened with unease. The device was switched off, but once powered, it revealed fragments of her last hours. Photos of animals, voice notes describing the scenery, ordinary details from an extraordinary place. Yet buried deeper were messages, recently deleted but partially recoverable. Emily had been corresponding with someone. The words were brief, urgent, almost intimate. "Meet me at the river. No one has to know. We can talk about it away from the others." And then, "Don't tell anyone." The officers exchanged glances. The text suggested not accident, but intention. Who was she meeting? One asked aloud, though the answer remained hidden in the grass. As word of the phone spread through the camp, suspicion intensified. The tourists whispered among themselves, avoiding direct eye contact. Each wondered if the other had known more than they admitted. Claire, the young bride, spoke in a tremor to her husband. "You don't think she was someone here?" James bristled. "She was reckless. Maybe she wanted attention. It doesn't mean anything." But his tone betrayed unease. The American students argued in hushed tones by the pool. She was into the guide, Brooke insisted. I told you. Maya shook her head. No, it was someone else. Someone she couldn't be seen with. Meanwhile, Richard Hale smoked alone, staring at the horizon, when an officer asked him for another statement. His lips curled into faintest smile before vanishing again into composure. The discovery of the phone did more than provide evidence. It ignited paranoia. Who had Emily trusted enough to meet in secret? And why had those messages been erased? As evening descended, the savannah returned to stillness. The drones landed, the rangers withdrew, and the dogs quieted at last. But the silence no longer felt natural. It pressed down heavily, echoing the questions no one wanted to answer. The police decided the investigation could not remain confined to daylight. They would gather the group that night, under watchful eyes and firelight, to probe further. Secrets rarely survive the dark. The fire cracked and spat embers into the heavy night air. The tourists sat in a loose circle around it, their faces lit in flickers of orange and shadow. Beyond the glow, the savannah stretched into darkness, a vast silence broken only by the distant call of hyenas. The lodge, once a retreat of comfort, now felt like a holding ground. No one would leave until the truth began to surface. The police had chosen this setting deliberately. They believed fire loosened tongues, stripped away the careful masks people wore under daylight. One by one, the tourists were pressed with questions, the flames reflected in their eyes like unspoken confessions. Claire, the young bride, spoke first. Her voice wavered, her hands twisting her wedding ring. She was close with Daniel, Claire whispered. I saw her walk with him more than once. She trusted him. Too much, maybe. James bristled beside her, his tone sharp. That doesn't prove anything. Guides talk to tourists all the time. But the implication had already landed. All eyes turned to Daniel, the safari guide who sat rigid in the shadows, his hands folded neatly in his lap. Daniel's expression did not falter, but his voice carried a careful restraint. Emily was curious about the land. She asked questions, wanted to know the stories of the river, the animals. That's all. An officer leaned forward. And you never walk with her alone? No, Daniel said flatly. Never. The fire popped loudly, as if mocking the silence that followed. Yet Claire pressed on, her voice breaking. That night at the bend in the river, I saw her. She wasn't with us. She was with him. Daniel. Daniel's head snapped toward her, his calm cracking. You lie, he hissed, his first uncontrolled outburst. The circle shifted uneasily, the tension sharp as wire. The officer seized on the slip, demanding clarity. Daniel backpedaled, insisting he had only reminded Emily to stay close to the group, but inconsistencies crept in. Earlier he had claimed she walked toward the river. Now, he insisted he never saw her leave the jeep. The contradictions settled over the group like smoke. Narration thickened with suspicion. Daniel, once a steady presence guiding them through the wilderness, now seemed shadowed by secrets. His past came under scrutiny. The police revealed he had once been dismissed from another tour company for inappropriate conduct. The details were vague, buried in bureaucracy, but the stain lingered. Maya, one of the American students, folded her arms. I told you she liked him. She followed him around like she needed something from him. Brooke cut her off sharply. Or maybe he needed something from her. The exchange rippled through the circle. Motives twisted and multiplied. Attraction, manipulation, opportunity. The lines between guide and guest blurred in the flickering dark. Richard Hale, who had remained silent, finally spoke, his voice smooth and deliberate. We're wasting time chasing ghosts. The girl was reckless. She could have gone off alone, fallen, been taken by the river, blaming the guide as convenient, but it doesn't make it true. His calmness only deepened suspicion. The police noted how his defense of Daniel felt less like reason and more like protection. The fire burned lower as the night dragged on. Sweat gathered on brows. Voices grew hoarse. But no clarity emerged. Daniel's story shifted just enough to unsettle, but not enough to convict. In the silence that followed, the crackle of fire filled a void where truth should have been. The tourists sat staring at one another, their eyes reflecting both fear and accusation. The officers knew one thing with certainty. Someone was lying. When the fire finally died to embers, the group was dismissed to their rooms, but none slept. Shadows lingered in every corner of the lodge, heavy with distrust. And as dawn approached, officers turned their attention not just to Daniel's story, but to Emily herself, her journals, her messages, her secrets. If betrayal existed, it might not have begun in the savannah, but long before, carried with her into the grasslands. The fire had burned to ash, but the doubts it lit refused to die. As officers withdrew to their quarters, files were spread across wooden tables, lanterns casting long shadows over paper. Among the evidence collected from Emily's room was a leather-bound journal, pages creased with hurried handwriting. It was there the investigation turned next, hoping her own words might speak where silence had swallowed everything else. The first entries drifted back to London, to nights of exhaustion where Emily scrawled her fears in ink. A young woman bearing the weight of medicine, lectures, and endless rotations, she confessed loneliness that cut deeper than any textbook. In one entry she wrote, "I am learning to fix others, but I don't know how to fix myself." It was in London that betrayal had first seeped into her story. A boyfriend she had clung to through distance, and time zones had shattered her trust. Photos had surfaced. Him laughing, arm draped around another woman, the lie of loyalty exposed in pixels. "I can't believe you do this," Emily had written in a message never sent, one the police later uncovered in her drafts. The discovery devastated her. Friends recalled her hollow expression, the way she studied harder, partied less, as though punishing herself for being deceived. That wound festered, and in its ache grew a craving for escape. The journal became her confidant. She wrote it wanted to vanish, not in death but in reinvention. She longed for landscapes larger than her grief, for faces untainted by betrayal. The safari had been more than a holiday. It was a search for meaning, for someone who might see her beyond the walls of lecture halls and broken promises. Her last entries turned darker, more intimate. Officers traced her looping handwriting late into the night. She wrote of meeting someone on the tour who listened when others dismissed her, someone who carried secrets too, and whose silence felt strangely safe. "For once, I feel seen here. He understands me." The words echoed in the dim lodge office, officers exchanging glances heavy with implication. Who was the he? Daniel, the guide, was the obvious suspect. His quiet intensity, his contradictions under questioning. It all aligned too neatly. But the detectives knew better than to trust simplicity. There were others. Richard Hale, with his practiced charm and evasive answers. Even James Thornton, bristling with anger that seemed disproportionate to a stranger's disappearance. Narration leaned into unease. Perhaps Emily, raw from betrayal, had mistaken attention for affection. Perhaps she had been manipulated by someone skilled at exploiting her vulnerability. One officer read aloud a later passage from the diary. He says not to tell anyone. He says people wouldn't understand. But when I'm with him, the noise quiets. Maybe this is what trust feels like again. The room chilled. The secrecy, the insistence on silence. It spoke not of safety but of danger. The pages ended abruptly, unfinished sentences trailing off into smudges where the ink had blurred. Whatever story she was beginning to write had been interrupted forever. As the night deepened, the detectives closed the journal with care. Outside, the savannah stretched vast and unknowable, the stars cruel in their brilliance. Emily's betrayal in London had sent her searching for connection. But here, beneath the African sky, that search may have bound her to the wrong person. Someone who offered solace, only to lead her toward ruin. The next morning would bring new revelations, not from her diary, but from the ground itself, where blood does not lie. Dawn broke harshly over the savannah, a light too clean for the darkness heavy in the investigators' minds. The journal had painted a portrait of a woman searching for love in the wrong places, but now the police needed proof carved into earth and steel. It came that morning, under the relentless hum of flies. An officer crouched beside the safari jeep, fingers brushing the metal where the paint was smeared darker than dust. At first glance, it looked like rust, a blemish from the rugged terrain. But closer inspection revealed it for what it was, dried blood. The forensic team swabbed the stain, the air thick with tension. Hours later, the results cracked a fragile calm. The blood was human, and it matched Emily Carter's DNA. The news spread like wildfire. Tourists whispered in clusters, their nerves already frayed by endless questioning. Cameras rolled as local reporters swarmed the lodge, pushing microphones at anyone who would speak. Headlines were already drafting themselves. Blood found in missing student case. Richard Hale, the wealthy businessman, was the first to respond when police brought him in. His expensive linen shirt clung to him with sweat as he insisted the blood was a remnant from a hunting trip days earlier. "I told you I shot an antelope." She helped move the carcass. "That's all this is. You're twisting a harmless moment into something vile." But the officers had checked his story. No reports of a hunt. No carcass registered. And the smear on the Jeep's side panel was too high, too deliberate. Not the spray of an animal dragged across dirt. Something else entirely. Suspicion shifted to Daniel, the safari guide. His stoicism had cracked before, but this time, under the weight of DNA evidence, he crumbled. He sat by the fire pit, where interrogations now bled into sleepless nights. Shadows licked his face, his hands trembling as he pulled them through his hair. "I didn't hurt her," he whispered, voice rough, as if confessing to ghosts more than men. The officer pressed harder. "Then whose blood is on your Jeep? Why do the timelines shift every time you speak?" Daniel's composure snapped. He slammed his fist against his knee, a raw sound tearing from his throat. "She confronted someone that night. That's what happened. She wasn't just wandering by the river. She was angry, shouting. I tried to stop it, but she wouldn't listen." The circle of officers leaned in, every word sharp as glass. Who was she confronting? Daniel's jaw locked, his eyes darting toward the lodge where the others slept uneasily. Silence stretched until it became unbearable, broken only by the crackle of firewood. "I can't," he said finally. "You don't understand what they're capable of." The refusal twisted the investigation further. If Daniel was protecting someone, was it out of loyalty, fear, or guilt? The detective saw both terror and defiance in him, a man caught in a trap of his own secrets. Narration lingered on the scene, the firelight reflecting his eyes, the savanna wind carrying distant howls, as though the land itself mourned. One officer tried again, softer this time. "Emily's family deserves to know the truth. You owe her that much." But Daniel only shook his head, muttering words too low to catch. The confession left the group shaken. If Emily had confronted someone, it meant betrayal ran deeper than imagined. Who among them had drawn her trust, only to turn it into danger? The businessman? The students? Someone hidden behind charm and money, or anger disguised as grief. The search team scoured the area near the Jeep again, and this time they found more. A single earring buried shallow in the sand, glinting faintly in the morning sun. It matched those Emily wore in her last photo. Evidence was stacking, pointing not toward an accident but a violent encounter. And yet, the figure at the heart of her confrontation remained hidden in shadow. As night crept back over the grasslands, the police knew the case had shifted. This was no longer about a missing girl. It was about unmasking the predator who had walked among them all along. And when dawn rose again, the mask would begin to slip. The earring glinted in the dust like a voice calling from the grave. Its presence near the bloody Jeep tore open suspicions. But it was the whispers inside the lodge that sharpened the investigation into something darker. That night, as the detectives revisited testimonies, a forbidden truth began to surface, one that shifted the weight of suspicion squarely onto Richard Hale. Richard, with his immaculate clothing and rehearsed charm, had brushed off questions before. But secrets do not stay buried in the savannah. The land has a way of exposing everything left behind. Witnesses began to talk. 2 American students, nervous and pale, admitted they had seen Emily and Richard walking together during one of the safari stops. Far from the group, they weren't just chatting. One whispered. It looked intimate, too close for strangers. The second nodded reluctantly. She touched his arm. He looked protective, almost desperate. We thought it was odd, but didn't want to start drama. The revelation cracked open a new line of inquiry. When officers confronted Richard, his face flushed with indignation. "This is ridiculous," he barked. "I'm married. I have no interest in some young student. People see what they want to see." But denial grew weaker when his wife, Eleanor Hale, was questioned privately, a woman of grace sharpened by years of silence. Eleanor sat rigid, hands folded tight in her lap. Her voice trembled, but not from fear, something closer to release. "I saw them," she admitted, eyes fixed on the floor, "at the watering hole. Richard thought I was asleep in the Jeep, but I wasn't." Emily followed him into the trees. "I waited, furious. When he returned, he was alone." The words dropped like stones into the tense air. Investigators pressed gently, and Eleanor's lips tightened. She came back later, looking shaken. "I thought," perhaps she regretted whatever had happened, "she would meet my eyes." The confession stung with betrayal, not just of Eleanor's marriage, but of Emily's trust. It painted a picture of secrecy, of arguments muffled by the rustling savanna. Emily, heartbroken from her past, may have clung to Richard's attention. Richard, cornered by his double life, may have promised more than he could give. Narration deepened into the psychological. Richard embodied temptation, a man whose wealth and charm cloaked emptiness. Emily, vulnerable and yearning, became entangled in a forbidden thread of desire. But secrets carried in silence always rot, and their affair had begun to unravel in public view. More witnesses stepped forward. A ranger recalled seeing Emily arguing heatedly with Richard near the riverbank. Their voices carried, fragments of words, enough to sketch the outline of betrayal. She was saying something about not being hidden anymore. The ranger testified. He told her to keep quiet, that people wouldn't understand. She stormed away. That phrase echoed eerily against Emily's diary. He says not to tell anyone. He says people wouldn't understand. The puzzle pieces aligned. Emily's forbidden romance had not been with Daniel, as suspicion once leaned, but with Richard Hale, a man with far more to lose than she realized. Richard was brought back for questioning, his composure crumbling at the edges. His lawyer's responses, no comment, misinterpretation, harassment, rang hollow against a rising tide of evidence. Finally, under the weight of his wife's testimony, his voice cracked. "Yes," he admitted through clenched teeth. "We were involved. Briefly. She was young, persistent. I made a mistake, but I didn't kill her." The lodge fell silent in the wake of his words. Betrayal hung in the air, a poisonous fog. For Eleanor, it was a public confirmation of what she had feared. For the investigators, it was motive laid bare: jealousy, exposure, the fear of scandal. But still, one question burned. If Richard was the man Emily confronted that night, why had Daniel insisted he couldn't reveal the truth? What did they mean in his broken confession by the fire? The chapter closed with Eleanor's voice, soft yet devastating. "He wanted her gone. He told me as much. Maybe not dead, but gone. Out of our lives." The words lingered, not as proof, but as accusation. And with them, suspicion sharpened into something lethal. The investigation had peeled back the first skin of lies. What remained would be bloodier still. The revelation of Richard's affair with Emily poisoned the air around the lodge, but it was a river that whispered the next clue. At dawn, rangers combed the banks where crocodiles slid silently beneath the surface. The land held its secrets, yet even silence breaks under pressure. It was there, snagged on thorns at the water's edge, that they found it, a torn jacket, soaked and stiff with mud. The fabric was pale blue, the same Emily wore in her last photograph. For the investigators, it was no longer just theory. Something violent had happened here. The river carried a reputation older than any crime. Its waters a graveyard for the careless and the unlucky. But Emily had not been careless. Someone had brought her here. The jacket's position suggested a struggle, dragged across the ground before vanishing into the current. The discovery demanded a reconstruction. As twilight fell, police and rangers gathered the tour group along the riverbank. A mannequin dressed in similar clothes was placed where the jacket had been found. Lanterns cast flickering light on the scene, while the moon rose over the restless water. The officers began retracing steps. Richard, One detective said sharply. You claimed Emily was with you only briefly. Yet her diary, the witnesses, even your wife confirm otherwise. Did your argument escalate here? Richard bristled, fists tight at his sides. No, we argued. Yes, she threatened to expose me. But I didn't push her. I walked away. Walked away, the detective repeated, eyes narrowing. Yet the blood on the Jeep, her earring in the sand, her jacket here. Your story crumbles with every word. Richard's gaze flicked to his wife, Eleanor, who watched from the shadows. Her silence was heavier than accusation. The focus shifted to Daniel, the guide. His voice was hoarse, his face hollow from sleepless nights. I told you, he muttered, staring at the ground. She confronted someone. She came down here after dinner. I followed, but I was too late. The detective pressed. Too late for what? Daniel hesitated, jaw clenching, eyes locked on the black ribbon of river. I saw her near the water. Someone was shouting. Then she was gone, pulled under. The current swallowed her before I could move. The group erupted, gasps, accusations, the Americans demanding answers. Richard stepped forward, livid. You're lying. You're trying to pin this on me because you couldn't protect her. Daniel's voice cracked. Protect her? You used her. You broke her heart and left her with nothing. Don't put your sins on me. The moon lit their faces, one flushed with rage, the other with despair. The river behind them gurgled and hissed, as if mocking human frailty. Narration lingered on the scene. Crocodiles shifted just beneath the water, their scales glinting like armor. The mannequin jacket hung limp in the lantern glow, a ghostly reminder of the girl who had worn it. The reconstruction ended without resolution. Too many lies, too many half-truths. Each version of events contradicted the next. Did Richard shove her in panic when she threatened to expose him? Did Daniel, driven by jealousy or loyalty, erase her to protect another? The river held the answers, but it guarded them jealously, its currents sweeping away blood, fabric, and flesh alike. As the group dispersed, the detectives remained by the bank, their reflections broken in the ripples. The truth was close. They could feel it, pressing at the edges of confession. Yet with every step forward, danger grew. Someone among them had killed, and someone among them was desperate enough to kill again. The chapter closed with a single image, the moon mirrored in the river, glowing silver before a crocodile's jaws snapped shut, swallowing the light whole. The silence deepened, and the savannah waited. The night after the river reconstruction pressed on like a wound that would not close. Detectives gathered the group again, their patience thinning. Lantern light burned harsh against weary faces, illuminating truths that could no longer be concealed. It was Eleanor Hale who shattered first. Her voice, brittle for days, finally broke like glass. "Stop protecting him," she screamed, startling everyone in the lodge common room. "He killed her. Richard killed that girl." Her words cut through the humid air, her body trembling as she clutched the arm of her chair. Tears streaked her cheeks, but there was fury in her eyes, too, a fury sharpened by betrayal and silence. Richard staggered to his feet, hands raised as if to push back the weight of accusation. "That's madness." She slipped. She fell. "I told you, she was emotional, unstable. I tried to calm her down, but she stormed off to the river." Detectives leaned forward, voices like knives. "Then explain the blood on your Jeep. Explain the bruise marks on the jacket." She didn't simply slip. She was struck. For a moment, Richard's mask held. His voice remained smooth, his expression cold, the practiced charm a man used to buy his way out of trouble. But pressure has a way of finding cracks, and soon the calm began to unravel. "I didn't mean to," he hissed, his voice trembling. She wouldn't stop. "She threatened to ruin me, my family, everything I built. She said she'd tell Eleanor. She'd tell the world." I just snapped. The confession was jagged, a wound torn open. Gasps rippled to the group, the Americans exchanging horrified glances, Daniel burying his face in his hands. Eleanor, sobbing, filled the silence. "You took everything from me," she cried. "First your lies, then your lover, and now her life. How many women do you have to destroy before you're satisfied?" Richard spun toward her, rage distorting his features. Don't you dare act innocent. You knew what this marriage was. You liked the money, the security. Don't pretend you cared about me, about her. Detective stepped between them, the room quaking with his fury. His voice, once calm and calculated, now roared with unrestrained anger. She should have listened, he shouted, veins pulsing at his temples. She should have left alone. None of this would have happened if she'd just stayed quiet. The words hung heavy, damning. The silence afterward was suffocating. Finally, an officer moved forward, cuffs gleaming in the firelight. Richard Hale, you are under arrest for the murder of Emily Carter. The moment his wrists were bound, his defiance drained into something hollow. He sagged against the officers, muttering incoherently, fragments of denial and blame spilling out as he was dragged into the darkness outside. But even as relief rippled to the group, uncertainty lingered. Detectives exchanged wary glances. The pieces did not yet fit cleanly. One pressed Daniel again. If you saw her that night, why didn't you come forward? Why hide behind silence? Daniel's eyes were rimmed with exhaustion, his voice hoarse. Because I didn't see everything. By the time I reached her, she was gone. The water took her. And if I had spoken sooner, they would have blamed me. His gaze lifted toward the door where Richard had been taken, but his words carried another weight, a shadow of complicity. Was it cowardice? Or was he still holding back the final truth? Narration closed in on the group. The crackling fire, Eleanor's sobs echoing through the lodge, the emptiness left by Richard's removal. For a moment, it seemed the nightmare might be ending. Yet the detectives knew better. Arrest brought answers, but not always closure. And somewhere, beneath the endless sweep of stars, the river still kept its silence, guarding the body it swallowed whole. The case was far from over. The river never surrendered fully. Weeks of searching brought only fragments. A strip of torn fabric, a strand of hair caught on reeds, and finally, a bone, small, pale, smooth by water. It was enough for science to confirm identity, but not enough for her family to lay her properly to rest. Emily Carter's body remained a ghost, scattered between mud and current, as if the land itself refused to give her back. Her disappearance had already ignited global headlines, but the discovery of blood, the affair, and Richard Hale's arrest turned the case into an international spectacle. Media outlets spun the story into endless cycles. The heiress's husband and the student, murder on safari, love, lies, and death in the grasslands. Strangers on other continents dissected Emily's life. Her Instagram selfies, her private grief, her final posts, as though knowing her fragments might explain her fate. The trial began in Nairobi under heavy security. Cameras crowded the courthouse steps, broadcasting each day's proceedings to a world hungry for scandal. The courtroom itself pulsed with tension. Emily's parents sat stiff and hollow-eyed in the front row, while Eleanor Hale appeared daily, her face unreadable, her silence now a weapon of its own. Richard Hale's defense painted him as a victim of circumstance, a man cornered by a young woman's obsession. His lawyer insisted Emily slipped near the river, her fall tragic but accidental. But the prosecution cut through with evidence. The blood on the Jeep, the jacket with bruising marks, the testimonies of those who saw their secret arguments. The most pivotal moment came when Daniel was called to the stand. His presence drew every eye, the quiet guide who had hovered at the edge of suspicion from the beginning. He looked worn, his shirt collar frayed, hands trembling as he swore to tell the truth. His testimony was halting, torn between guilt and honesty. "She trusted me," he said softly, voice cracking. "She told me she was scared of what would happen if she exposed the affair. I wanted to protect her, but I failed." The prosecutor pressed harder. "Did you see Richard strike her?" Daniel shook his head, anguish carving lines into his face. "No, I saw them fighting. I saw her cry. He grabbed her arm. She pulled away. I left for a moment. When I came back, she was near the water. Then she was gone." The court buzzed with whispers. His account offered no clear vision of the killing, only shadows and half-truths. The defense seized on the gaps, painting Daniel as unreliable, as a man projecting guilt for his own failure to act. But the fragments of evidence outweighed his uncertainty. The blood stain, the earring, Eleanor's testimony of secrecy and rage. They built a wall too high for Richard climb. The verdict came after weeks of agony. Richard Hale was convicted not of murder, but of manslaughter, an outcome that split the courtroom. Some called it justice. Others called it compromise. The judge declared that Richard had caused Emily's death through violence and negligence, but the absence of complete body left shadows of doubt that dulled the blade of the sentence. Emily's parents wept quietly, holding hands as though clinging to the memory of their daughter. Outside the court, they faced cameras with dignity fractured by pain. "Our Emily deserved a future," her mother said, voice trembling. "We thank the court for recognizing responsibility, but justice feels incomplete. We will never have her back." Narration lingered on that moment, the paradox of victory that tasted like ash. The world moved on quickly, another headline to devour. But for those bound Emily's story, the wounds remained open. Eleanor vanished from public view, her life reduced to whispers of divorce and exile. Daniel returned to Savannah, his silence heavier than before, burdened by what-ifs and the knowledge that he could not save her. And the river kept its secrets. Beneath the moonlight, crocodiles slid to the black water, indifferent to human grief. The fragments recovered were all that remained, scattered bones that spoke of a life interrupted, a heart betrayed. Justice had been served, yet only in fragments. The story closed as it began, with a photograph. Emily's last selfie, elephants behind her, sunlight in her smile, a frozen moment of hope, untouched by the darkness that followed. Years passed, and yet the weight of Emily's absence never lightened. Trials ended, headlines faded, lives moved forward, but grief lingered like a shadow that never truly dissolved. For Emily's family, time did not heal. It merely softened edges that still cut when touched. Her mother, Margaret Carter, returned to Savannah on the anniversary of her daughter's disappearance. The world had aged her, lines carved deeper across her face, hair streaked with silver. Yet her eyes, though tired, held a quiet strength, as if she carried both sorrow and defiance in equal measure. She traveled with only a small satchel and a bouquet of wildflowers, gathered from a Nairobi market. Guides remembered her, whispering among themselves. They had watched the story consume the world, and then slip into silence. Just another tragedy replaced by new scandals. But to see the mother return alone was something different, a reminder that loss never really ended, even when the world stopped paying attention. She asked to be taken to the river, the same river that once swallowed the traces of her daughter, now shimmered in the late afternoon sun, deceptively calm. Crocodiles slid silently beneath the surface, their eyes glinting like stones. The reeds whispered with the wind, as if carrying voices from the past. Margaret knelt at the bank, placing the flowers gently onto the water. They floated, spinning slowly, before drifting into the current. Her fingers lingered in the air, trembling, as if she longed to reach through the years, to touch Emily once more. "You deserve so much more," she whispered. Narration layered over the scene, a reflective voice that seemed to belong both to her and to Savannah itself. How a young woman's search for freedom and love had collided with betrayal and violence. How secrets hidden in human hearts could unravel against a backdrop of breathtaking wilderness. Emily's diary had once written of feelings seen in Africa, yet what saw her last was neither lover nor friend, but the indifferent river, the grasslands that swallowed her cry, the endless plains that bore witness to both beauty and cruelty. The camera of memory panned outward, from Margaret's lone figure, fragile yet unyielding, to the sweeping expanse of golden savanna. Wildebeests grazed in the distance. Birds wheeled across a reddening sky. Life pulsed everywhere, indifferent to human tragedy. This was a paradox of the wild. Its majesty could inspire awe, yet concealed horrors and silence. It had held its secrets through storms and centuries, and it continued to hold Emily's, the truth of her final moments, the precise way her life ended, forever veiled. Margaret rose slowly, brushing dust from her hands. She turned once more toward the river, tears streaking her face, but her voice steady. "I will not let you be forgotten." It was both a vow and a farewell. As the sun dipped, painting the horizon in streaks of crimson and gold, The narration closed on a haunting reflection. Justice had been partial, truth fractured, love corrupted, yet memory endured. Emily's story was more than a headline, more than a trial. It was a reminder that the most dangerous predators sometimes wore human faces, hidden behind charm, wealth, or silence. The final cinematic image lingered on the vast plains. The grass swayed in a quiet rhythm. The river glistened, impenetrable. The wind carried nothing but the soft rustle of leaves and the distant call of animals. Still beautiful, still silent, still holding its secrets.